Hello students, welcome back to this series on the explanation of the UPSC Mains Examination 2022 question papers. And so far we had seen certain aspects of GS1, certain aspects of the GS3. And when we look at these aspects of GS1 and GS3, in today's section, we are going to discuss about the continuation of GS3, the economy section. And when you look at this economy section, I thought why not divide it into two different parts, for the reason that it is asked for 85 marks, where 35 marks were asked from the conceptual economy, and the other 50 marks were asked from agriculture and as well as the food processing. So we would have two different videos being made upon this, one on the agriculture and food processing, the other with respect to the core economy concepts. And let's have a look at these questions. The question number 1 belongs to economy. Question number 2 belongs to economy. Then again, question number 11, which is a 15 marker, also belongs to this core economy section. So in this particular video, we are going to discuss about these three questions. Now let's have a brief look at these questions and then we'll get into the structure part and then we'll get into how to go about writing this answer. And when you look at this particular question, why is the P required for infrastructural projects? It is asking about indirectly the significance of P, especially in infrastructural projects. Then examine the role of P in redevelopment of railway stations. Examine the role of P in redevelopment of railway stations. That means it is categorically asking about the development of railway stations vis-a-vis the P. That is what is supposed to be understood here. Right? Again, if you would have followed the current affairs, this is a straightforward question that has been buzzed in the news. Right? So moving on to the second question, is inclusive growth possible by market economy or possible under market economy? Now here what is it asking? It is asking about the inclusive growth, and we know by looking at the trends of UPSC and the corresponding GS3 questioning, you would see that inclusive growth is one of the favorite topics of UPSC that you see and often questioning coming from this particular section, either a 10 marker or a 15 marker without any fail. Right? So here it is asking about that is it possible in a market economy, because you know that market economy will have certain characteristics like competition, like private participation, like profit, right? All these components are going to be present. Now, state the significance of the financial inclusion in achieving economic growth. Now, it is asking about state the significance of achieving the financial growth, especially with respect to or the financial inclusion in the context of economic growth. It is asking that. That means it is indirectly asking there is a relation that is existing between inclusion and growth. Right? This is with respect to this question. And when you look at this 11th question, which is a 15 marker, it fundamentally says that economic growth in the recent past has led by increase in labor productivity. And you know that one of the factors of production, especially in the context, you see that labor is one of the factors. And it is asking about how is this labor productivity resulted in the economic growth in the recent past. That is what it is asking. Then apart from that, it is asking about explain the statement, because when you look at this particular aspect, you know that one particular parameter that we generally study is ICOR, incremental capital output ratio. And when you have this incremental capital output ratio, you know that this is also an indication with respect to what is the rate of output that is there and what is the extent of investment that is required, and it also gives an indication that what is the labor productivity that is present in an economy. That labor productivity factor in an economy can also be judged from understanding this phenomena of ICOR. Right? Once we understand this, it is asking about the second part of the question, suggest the growth pattern that will lead to increase of more jobs without compromising the labor productivity. It is asking about a corresponding or a specific growth pattern vis-a-vis without affecting the labor productivity vis-a-vis creation of more jobs. So it is trying to balance growth job creation and labor productivity. As it is trying to balance the job, labor productivity as well as the economic growth, what it is happening is you see that in the economic trajectory of India, the economic journey of the India as a nation in the context of economy, you see that there was certain phase where there was a phenomena called jobless growth. And there what happened is there was on the one side there was this growth phenomena that was rampant. But on the other side you would see the employment generation was very, very less. So this particular statement is categorically saying to minimize those impacts. Minimize and never repeat that such a kind of condition, and how are we supposed to balance that? That is what is this particular question talking about. Now let's look at the detailed analysis. How can we write a structure for such questions, right? Yes, starting off with this, that it is asking about why is triple P required in infrastructural projects, right? Here we can straight away start off the introduction part can be with respect to what is the understanding of triple P, public private partnership. What is the understanding of this triple P? That means it has got to do with collaboration, right? It has got to do with the collaboration. And not only that, it also talks about sharing of risk, sharing of revenue, sharing of resources, and not only that, also sharing of responsibilities. It is also to do with respect to the sharing of responsibilities, right? Your triple P is all about this. And when you look at the significance, vis-a-vis the infrastructural projects, it is asking about the significance vis-a-vis infrastructural projects, and when you look at the significance, this is the first dimension which you are supposed to open up in this particular question. And when you look at this particular aspect in this particular question, what we see is that first thing we can talk about the access to the finance. The access to the finance. You know that there would be an enablement with respect to the pooling of resources. Once you are having that pooling of resources, you know that this finance access will become better. The second one, it is again with respect to the technology that is available, especially in establishing infrastructural projects. Because what happens is, you know, one of the major issues that is generally seen in the infrastructural projects is the stalling of the projects. That means you would see the average lifespan that is taken for an infrastructural project is over 20 years in the context of India, which is very, very huge, which impacts the economic growth trajectory, which impacts the necessary objective that has to be met by establishing such an infrastructure. Right? So it also enables us to meet this technological element. And not only that, it also creates a kind of mechanism that provides a transparency, because you know that there is a self-accountability kind of system that is established in the context of triple P. Then apart from that, we also see the timely completion. We also see the timely completion of the projects. Not only the timely completion of the projects, but we also see that there can be better designs. Better designs, right? Better designs. That is what is that? Then the sixth and the foremost element with respect to any infrastructural project is you would see that the risk or that burden is generally shared among the two stakeholders that are present. One is the private sector, the other one is the public sector. Right? In this aspect, you need to bring about this particular question. One is with respect to finance, technology, transparency, timely completion, the better designs, and sharing of risk or burden or responsibilities. As we discussed, the 4R approach with respect to infrastructure, with respect to the triple P. And once we understand this, the second aspect we need to discuss is with respect to the role of triple P, especially in redevelopment of railway stations, right? The redevelopment of railway stations, this is what is the second dimension that is being talked about. And when you look at this, here we need to categorically talk about the redevelopment project that is undertaken in Rani Kamlapati railway station in Bhopal. Rani Kamlapati station in Bhopal that I was discussing as part of the introduction to this particular question, right? You can give this as a particular introduction to this question which will set the context, or the other kind of introduction can be with respect to your triple P. And with respect to this triple P, and you understand that what happens is, this would provide a better choice. The triple P in the context of redevelopment would provide a better choice. It would provide a better choice, and not only a better choice with respect to the equipment that is used for the redevelopment, but also enable the facilities. Enable the facilities with respect to such a creation. Right? Not only the facilities that are created with respect to, in this context, what happens is it also enables the competitive nature. The competitive nature, because you know that competition will certainly lead to improvement, right? That competitive nature. Now this competitive nature would certainly promote a commercial element that is present. Commercial element that is present. And with that commercial element, what happens is, we know that this would further lead to the non-fare or non-ticketing revenue. Non-ticketing revenue or non-ticket revenue or non-fare revenue, this would be promoted, because we know one particular aspect with respect to especially the railways in India is, what we see with respect to railways in India in the context of India is that we know that there is this phenomena of operating ratio. And when you look at this operating ratio in the context of railways of India, it is around 96%. And that means we need to invest 96 paisa to get 1 rupee. That means which is very, very high. As per the CAG report, which is very, very high. That means in order to enhance this operating ratio, what fundamentally is required is the competition, and what is required is competition, and such a competition can be created by triple P. That is what is the understanding in this context of this question, right? With such elements, we can write this answer, okay? And further moving on, with respect to this, the second question, right? Maybe the previous question with respect to triple P can be concluded by talking about that it ensures not only the development but also ensures the utilization. And not only the utilization, but it also ensures an element of revenue generation with respect to railway stations, right? That is what is required. Now moving on to the next question, that is with respect to the inclusive growth. It is asking about, is inclusive growth possible in market economy? That is what it is asking, right? And the significance of financial inclusion in achieving economic growth. Right? When you look at this market economy, what happens is, you would see that any market economy will have an element of organization and an element of function with respect to market. And you would see that this market economy is all driven by the market forces, that is the supply and the demand. And when you look at the major element of any market economy, you would see that there is an element of competition. There is element of competition, there is element of ownership, there is element of partnership. And not only that, there is also an element that is present with respect to this is, you would see that there is the private player which is playing. Right? The private element. That means when you look at categorically about this market economy, it is all about the elements of liberalization and privatization and globalization, where you would have an element of integration again. Now here what is it asking? The first stage is economic growth possible by market economy? That is what is the question they are asking. That in such an element of competition, in such an element of ownership, in such an element of motive for profit, in such an element of privatization, or the element of private elements present or private entities present, is inclusive growth possible? That is what is asking, right? When you look at the elements of inclusive growth, because inclusive growth is all about what, my dear? When you look at the inclusive growth, it is all about growth by all, growth for all, and growth with all. And when you try to understand what is this inclusive growth, it fundamentally means that the whatever benefits of growth is being reaped. Whatever benefits of growth is being reaped, it is being utilized by the people. And not only that, whatever is the process of growth that is happening, you see the participation of the public. Right? Whatever the process is happening, you see the participation of the people happening. Right? With such kind of consideration and with such kind of understanding of this market economy, you can state that market economy would promote majorly the financial growth. The financial growth. Certainly the market economy would promote the financial growth. Right? Now in this context of financial growth, what happens is, you know that only one component of inclusive growth is met. Only one component of inclusive growth is met. As you know that any inclusive growth will include what? Will include the social development. The elements will include the access to essential services, will also include the financial inclusion, will also include the skill development phenomena, will also include the economic growth and the growth process and the participation in the growth process. Right? What is happening is all of these elements are included in inclusive growth. And once you understand these elements, you know that only market economy is going to meet this financial aspect and financial growth. And as it is only one particular element in this process of inclusive growth, we know that it results in a partial inclusive growth, not completely. Because it can so happen that this might also result in, with the capacity of production being concentrated in few hands, this might also result in inequality. That is what is the understanding that we are supposed to have with respect to this inclusive growth. And once we understand that particular concept, here it is asking about how is this financial inclusion. It is asking about that how is this financial inclusion It is asking about how is this financial inclusion promoting the economic growth, or how is this financial inclusion promoting the economic growth. That is what is being asked, the second part. So the first part is this and the second part is this. And when you look at this particular understanding of how is this financial inclusion promoting this growth, you get to understand that what happens is it provides an access to institutional credit. And not only that it provides an access to the institutional credit, but what happens is with such access to institutional credit, we would see a multiplier effect. We would see a multiplier effect that is present in the economy, which will further lead to creation of jobs, which will further promote entrepreneurship, which will further promote the skill development. And not only that, what happens is you would also see that with the financial inclusion, there is a better targeting. There is a better targeting which happens. And because as this financial inclusion is resulting in a better targeting, because a classic case of the jam trinity is what is resulting in the financial inclusion. And once you understand this jam trinity and once you understand this element of better targeting in this context, what happens, my dear, you know that it would promote the efficiency in the service delivery mechanism and it would also optimize the resources. As it optimizes the resources, it would further lead to the development, it would further lead to better expenditure, better spending, better rationalization of the resource spending and the expenditure that is seen in the governmental context. Right? With such understanding, we can conclude that financial inclusion is a key element with respect to inclusive growth. And the balancing force or the forces of market or the market forces can be balanced in a right manner only through the element of inclusive growth. That can be a composite kind of interaction that can be given towards the end of your answer. Is this clear? Right? This is what is the line of thought that has to be discussed here. Okay? Because we know that this inclusive growth happens to be one of the favorite topics with respect to UPSC. That's what we need to understand. Right? Moving on to the 15 marker that is present in this particular section. And when you look at the 15 marker that is present in this particular section, we get to see that it is asking about the economic growth in the recent past. Economic growth in the recent past has led by increase in the labor productivity. That means the first part of the question, it is asking that economic growth has been led by the labor productivity. They are asking to explain the relation that is existing between the labor productivity and the economic growth. The second thing it is asking about, that suggest a growth pattern. Suggest a growth pattern to create jobs without losing the labor productivity. That is what is the second part of the question saying. And when you try to understand these two parts in the question here, it is again a very, very core concept that you need to understand from the economy. Because what happens is, there are different factors of production that are present. And one very, very important factors of production that you generally see is labor. And the labor productivity is going to determine so much the extent of production in the India. Right? In that context, we need to understand this particular question. Now here you could have simply understood, or you could have simply introduced by saying what do you understand by labor productivity. And not only that, what do you understand by labor productivity, but we can also talk about what is the status of labor productivity in India. Right? We can talk about what is labor productivity and what is the status of labor productivity in India. Or we can also bring in a context that what happened during COVID-19. What happened during COVID-19? Now in this context, what is happening is, now the first part of the question, it is asking how is this economic growth happening due to labor productivity. And when you try to understand this, how is this economic growth happening due to labor productivity is nothing but the efficiency of the functioning that is present with respect to the labor, efficiency of labor in the economic activity, right? As I was discussing in the introduction, what happens, that the I-core as a parameter is going to determine this labor productivity. What is going to be the extent of labor productivity that is present, right? That is what is to be understood with respect to this I-core as a parameter. And once we understand this I-core as a parameter, we would get to understand the other aspects, right? Now when you look at the relation that is existing, what happens is, with labor productivity, the extent of production enhances. And not only the extent of production enhances, that the industrial activity in the country will be ramped up. The industrial activity will be ramped up. Not only with respect to this industrial activity being ramped up, you also know that the extent of expenditure will be reduced. And not only the extent of expenditure being reduced, what happens is, with labor productivity enhancement, you would also see the savings rate in the context, because that the income levels would certainly go up. As the income levels are going up, you also know that with a certain expenditure being present, that the savings rate might also go up, and which would further lead to investment. Right? Then apart from that, what happens is, we can also talk about labor productivity being a multiplier for entrepreneurial skills. And you can also talk about the employment generation that can happen with the enhancement of startups. And not only this labor productivity can also promote some of the smaller industrialization in the form of MSMEs. MSMEs, majorly, to be very, very precise, that is the labor intensive production, the labor intensive industries, right? Because the future of Indian employment and the future of Indian economic growth is going to lie in this particular sector, and the transition from the capital intensive to the labor intensive is what is required and what is the need of the hour in the context of Indian economy. And once you are able to talk about such a kind of relation that is existing here, right, we can even talk about that virtual cycle that is created. Now that virtuous cycle, what happens, that the labor productivity, you see that the labor productivity is increasing. As the labor productivity is increasing, what happens is, you also know the scope for the production levels are increasing. As the production levels are increasing, what is happening? The extent of profits are increasing. As the extent of profits are increasing, what you would see? The investment would further increase. As this investment further increases, what happens is, the income of the labor is seen to increase. With the income, what happens is, it would incentivize the individuals to work more, it would incentivize the individuals to push forward. And not only that, what happens is, you also need to see that the aspect with respect to this increase in labor activity, what happens is, you also need to see that this labor activity was fundamentally seen because of the schemes like NG Narega, the schemes like construction, right? So it is asking about what, my dear? It is asking about this completely labor intensive industries, labor driven economic activity. That is what is seen. That is what is being asked. And once we discuss about this part, the second part it is asking that suggest the growth pattern that will lead to creation of more jobs without compromising labor productivity. It is talking about without compromising this labor productivity, how can we create more jobs with a particular growth pattern. And when we look at the second part, that is the growth pattern vis-a-vis the creation of jobs. This is the second part of the question. Growth pattern vis-a-vis the creation of jobs. And when we look at this growth pattern vis-a-vis the creation of jobs, it is categorically talking about what? It is again this labor intensive industries. And not only the labor intensive industries, but it is also talking about a competitive market. It is also talking about the competitive market, right? So labor intensive industries and also the competitive market suggest the growth pattern that will lead to the creation of more jobs, right? That means we have to talk about this labor intensive industries. Not only that, we also need to focus upon what, my dear? That we also need to focus upon the rural sector. We also need to focus upon rural sector, because what happens is when you look at the rural sector, we know that more than 50% of the population is dependent on agriculture. And when we observe the particular trend that is happening with respect to the transition, we see that most of the people are directly transitioning from agriculture to the from agriculture to the services sector. But in the organic manner of any economy, what is the general transition is we see that from agriculture to manufacturing to services sector. But in the case of India, this is what is the trend. But what is supposed to happen? This is what is supposed to happen. So in this context, what can happen is because of this transition from agriculture to services directly, we had seen this phenomena of jobless growth that I was mentioning initially. The jobless growth. Now, so what happens is it is high time for India to revamp such a kind of economic system and see this organic transition that happens from agriculture sector to manufacturing, then to service sector. Because what happens is with that kind of thing only we will be able to generate the jobs. We will be able to generate the jobs without affecting the labor productivity, and also with an emphasis upon the production systems, with an emphasis on the MSMEs. Right, because what happens is when you look at the Indian context of manufacturing, in the Indian context of manufacturing, it is around 16% of GDP which has been stagnant. Such a manufacturing sector has to be revamped in consideration of the National Manufacturing Policy 2011 which was mentioned. So such a kind of revamping, such a kind of reconsideration has to happen. Right, such a kind of the growth pattern which can be followed. That is what is they are asking about, this revamping that has to happen in this context of the Indian economy. And once we realize this aspects of Indian economy, we can say that we can safely conclude talking about the future of Indian economic systems and the future of Indian employment will be lying into the hands of the labor intensive industries like textiles, like leather, like footwear, right? All such industries are labor intensive industries, because when you look at one particular case study that we can talk about, we can talk about the Bangladesh. Because when we look at the growth trajectory of Bangladesh and when we look at the recovery of the economy of the Bangladesh after COVID, it was the strength of that their economy was fundamentally seen because their economic systems are majorly driven by labor intensive industries. Such a case study can be stated in this context. And not only that, we can also talk about the generation of or the improving upon certain innovative sectors. Not only the innovative sectors, we can also talk about the phenomena of upskilling, reskilling. All such phenomena can be discussed in the context of the conclusion of such a question. Right? So when you look at these economic questions, what happens, my dear? You just need to have fundamental understanding of the concepts. Once you have the fundamental understanding of the concepts, the analysis is straightforward. Once you go back to the basics, once you are able to understand those basics, the analysis is easy. And please remember, my dear, whenever you are writing an economy answer, you have to substantiate it with data. You have to substantiate it with data at any cost. There is no compromise with respect to substantiation, because economics is all driven by data. That is what is supposed to be understood whenever you are writing an answer in the economy. right? With such an understanding, we come to the end of this video, right? We would continue the agriculture and food processing industry in the next video. Thank you.